Okay, so I'm doing this project for my Christian existence class, and I'm just gonna ask you guys a couple of questions just about your marriage and your views on marriage. So, how long have you been married?
22 years in
And
September.
and how old were you when you met each other?
28 and 30.
So you met each other, and then how long did it take for you to get married or get engaged, I guess?
We dated for about
9 months.
8 or 9 months, and I asked your mother to marry me. And we got married, I guess,
A year and a half.
a year and a half later, yeah.
So do you think it was, you don't think it was too short that you knew each other, that you got married? You don't think it was too quick?
No,
You thought you both were ready?
we were a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
We had other relationships in the past, and we knew that we loved each other, so we really didn't have to wait.
That's very nice. Can you describe your courtship?
Well, it was a long distance courtship because I lived in Connecticut and your mother lived in Queens.
We worked together.
We worked for the same company, but not together. And we saw each other when we could, and on days off, and we tried to make the best of the time, best use of our time.
But the distance didn't keep, it wasn't a burden on the relationship between you two?
No, not at all.
No?
We made it work.
Good. Now, why did you decide to get married? Or, Dad, why did you decide that you were going to ask Mom to marry you?
I fell in love with her.
Was there a single moment, or it was just building up and you knew you had to?
I think I just knew. I knew she was the right one for me, and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. And there wasn't one moment. I think when you find the right one, you know.
And can you describe your engagement?
You can take this one.
Well, the event of our engagement was a surprise. But I knew that we would get married. We had discussed that, right? Yes. We knew right away we wanted to get married, like within months.
Oh, really? Huh.
And he surprised me with a ring.
And I asked her to marry me, and I told her to close her eyes and put her hand out. And she would not open her eyes.
I got scared.
And I said, will you marry me? And she's just looking at her finger, and she wouldn't answer me. And I was like, oh, that was a bad decision. But eventually she came out of her
My
shock
Yeah.
and said yes.
Okay. And so you were
We had a long engagement, a year and a half,
a year and a half
so
engaged.
that we could work out jobs,
Relocation,
Relocation.
where we would live.
just discuss how we
So
were going to live our lives.
You guys took time and really thought about what you wanted from each other and what you were going to do to help each other out and make it work.
Well, we
Kinda.
discussed, where we would live.
We
and
discussed kids
Before you were married, you
before
discussed
we
kids.
were married. We discussed money before we were married.
Your mother always discusses money.
And what were each of you looking for in a spouse, I guess? I mean, maybe you weren't looking, you just found each other. You weren't going out and dating and trying to find that person knew you wanted to marry. It wasn't a category, you just kind of met each other and that was it.
Well, I don't think you go out looking for certain qualities in somebody. I think when you find somebody and you grow up with similar values and there's just a connection, and you kind of know that this person is right for you.
Because we were older, we already established careers, we'd already traveled, so we already knew how we liked to live.
Okay. And was the marriage what you thought it would be? Like, were your expectations the same as what real marriage was, the reality of it, or?
I don't
Probably
know. Hard
not.
to tell, because you know what, my parents had a very different marriage than your mother's parents, and I think you probably try to emulate what you see growing up. I think when we finally just developed our own marriage and learned to do things that we both liked instead of what we were used to, I think we kind of found, our own way.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah. It's still a work in progress, you would say? You're still working,
I think you always have to work at your marriage.
Yeah.
You can't take it for granted. And when it gets difficult, you don't walk away.
Right. And so you had already discussed children before you got married, but how did having children, and at two separate times, how did that affect your marriage? You both were working.
Oh, it
And
changed my life probably more than yours. We discussed. Did we discuss that I was going to leave work before? No.
No.
So we did everything very, very quickly. We got married.
Right.
Decided we wanted to have children very quickly afterwards. And then I kept working. We needed more space. We had a 1-bedroom apartment. So when we couldn't find a bigger apartment, we bought a house. And then we got my parents to help us, and we worked opposite hours so that we could be home with Jesse as much as we could, and my parents were good about helping. And then we just looked at life and decided that one of us needed to be home, that we liked the traditional lifestyle, and we did planning and worked out the numbers, because I always talk about money, and figured out that I would be the one that would stay home, not simply because that's the tradition, but because we expected that Ken would be better off career-wise than I would be.
Okay. And you have 2 children, Jessica, who is now 20, and me, Kenny, who is now 18. But when did you decide that you were going to leave work? Was that with Jessica, and then you just figured you were going to have another child and stayed with it, or you thought maybe after you had your first child you would go back to work?
I did go back to work.
You did?
6 weeks after Jesse was born, I went back to work, and it was very difficult on both of us.
Yeah, coming and going, opposite schedules. Since Grandma was watching Jesse, your mom and I took off opposite days, worked
So
late
we would
shifts and
have
early
one day
shifts.
together, and the other 6 days of the week we would just kind of pass each other. And then it was getting difficult for my parents, and my mother was going to be 62, right?
It was just tough. It was tough for Grandma, to be watching a baby, and
Yeah.
so Mom and I decided, that one of us needed to stay home, and it was her that stayed home, and the rest is kind of history.